Hey guys, in this month's Historical Fiction 101, I'm going to be going through all of the Goodreads nominees for historical fiction. So it's another year of Goodreads nominations for some of the best books of the year. And as always, my personal favorite category is always the historical fiction category. So yeah, I'm just going to be going through in this video looking through every one of the 20 books nominated in the historical fiction category, because many of them, there's several that I have never heard of and I don't even know what they're about, so we're just going to sit here together and go through them. And do we agree? Do we not agree? Who knows? And I feel like every year, it's like as much historical fiction as I read, it's like apparently I'm not reading the right type of historical fiction, because the books I read, none of them are ever nominated half the time. maybe I'm just weird. So everybody, grab a cup of tea, coffee, your preferred beverage of choice. Pull up your Goodreads. I'm going to be over here looking at my Goodreads and reading off the synopsises for each of these books. So if any of them sound like something you might enjoy, add it to your Goodreads. Okay, so first up, we have The Wind Knows My Name by Isabel Allende. Vienna, 1938. Samuel Adler was 6 years old when his father disappeared during Kristallnacht, the night their family lost everything. Samuel's mother secured a spot for him on the last Kindertransport train out of Nazi-occupied Austria to the United Kingdom, which he boarded alone, carrying nothing but a change of clothes and his violin. So that's like the historical fiction setting, and then there is a contemporary setting with this novel as well, taking place in Arizona, 2019. 8 decades later, Anita Diaz, a blind 7-year-old girl, and her mother board another train, fleeing looming danger in El Salvador and seeking refuge in the United States. However, their arrival coincides with the new family separation policy, and Anita finds herself alone at a camp in Nogales. She escapes through her trips to Azabahar, a magical world of the imagination she created with her sister back home. Anita's case is assigned to Selena Duran, a young social worker who enlists the help of a promising lawyer from one of San Francisco's top law firms. Together, they discover that Anita has another family member in the United States, Leticia Cordero, who is employed at the home of now 86-year-old Samuel Adler, linking these two lives. Ooh, interesting. Next up, The Keeper of Hidden Books by Madeline Martin. All her life, Zofia has found comfort in two things during times of hardship: books and her best friend, Yania. But no one could have imagined the horrors of the Nazi occupation in Warsaw. As the bombs rain down and Hitler's forces loot and destroy the city, Zofia finds that now books are also in need of saving. With the death count rising and persecution intensifying, Zofia jumps to action to save her friend and salvage whatever books she can from the wreckage, hiding them away and even starting a clandestine book club. She and her dearest friend never surrender their love of reading, even when Yania is forced into the newly formed ghetto. But the closer Warsaw creeps toward liberation, the more dangerous life becomes for the women and their families, and escape may not be possible for everyone. As the destruction rages around them, Zofia must fight to save her friend and preserve her culture and community using the only weapon they have left: literature. Next up, The Secret Book of Flora Lee by Patty Callahan Henry. In the war-torn London of 1939, 14-year-old Hazel and 5-year-old Flora are evacuated to a rural village to escape the horrors of the Second World War. Living with the kind Bridie Aberdeen and her teenage son Harry in a charming stone cottage along the River Thames, Hazel fills their days with walks and games to distract their young sister, including one that she creates for her sister and her sister alone, a fairy tale about a magical land, a secret place they can escape to that is all their own. But the unthinkable happens when young Flora suddenly vanishes while playing near the banks of the river. Shattered, Hazel blames herself for her sister's disappearance, and she carries that guilt into adulthood as a private burden she feels she deserves. 20 years later, Hazel is in London, ready to move on from her job at a cozy rare bookstore to a career at Sotheby's. With a charming boyfriend and her elegantly time-worn Bloomsbury flat, Hazel's future seems determined, but her tidy life is turned upside down when she unwraps a package containing an illustrated book called Whisperwood and the River of Stars. Hazel never told a soul about the imaginary world she created just for Flora. Could this book hold the secrets to Flora's disappearance? Could it be a sign that her beloved sister is still alive after all these years? Oh, okay, that sounds pretty intriguing, I think. Next up, Did You Hear About Kitty Carr by Crystal Smith Paul. When Kitty Carr Tate, a white icon of the silver screen, dies and bequeaths her multi-million-dollar estate to the St. John sisters, three young, wealthy black women, it prompts questions, lots of questions. A celebrity in her own right, Elise St. John would rather focus on sorting out Kitty's affairs than deal with the press. But what she discovers is one of Kitty's journals rocks her world harder than any other brewing scandal could. In between a cheating fiance and the fallout from a controversial social media post, there are plenty. The truth behind Kitty's ascent to stardom from her beginnings in the segregated South threatens to expose a web of unexpected family ties, debts owed, and debatable crimes that could, with one pull, unravel the all-American fabric of the St. John sisters and those closest to them. As Elise digs deeper into Kitty's past, she must also turn the lens upon herself, confronting the gifts and burdens of her own choices and the power that the secrets of the dead hold over the living. Next up, Hang the Moon by Jeanette Walls. Sally Kincaid is the daughter of the biggest man in a small town, the charismatic Duke Kincaid. Born at the turn of the 20th century into a life of comfort and privilege, Sally remembers little about her mother who died in a violent argument with the Duke. By the time she is just 8 years old, the Duke has remarried and had a son, Eddie. While Sally is her father's daughter, sharp-witted and resourceful, Eddie is his mother's son, timid and cerebral. When Sally tries to teach young Eddie to be more like their father, her daredevil coaching leads to an accident, and Sally is cast out. 9 years later, she returns, determined to reclaim her place in the family. That's a lot more complicated than Sally expected, and she enters a world of conflict and lawlessness. Sally confronts the secrets and scandals that hide in the shadows of the big house, navigates the factions in the family and town, and finally comes into her own as a bold, sometimes reckless bootlegger. Next up, Beyond That, The Sea by Laura Spence Ash. We got another World War II book on this list, you guys. Good Lord. So far, that's like, 3 or 4 books? As German bombs fall all over London in 1940, working-class parents Millie and Reginald Thompson make an impossible choice. They decide to send their 11-year-old daughter, Beatrix, to America. There she'll live with another family for the duration of the war, where they hope she'll stay safe. Scared and angry, feeling lonely and displaced, Bea arrives in London to meet the Gregorys. Mr. and Mrs. G and their sons, William and Gerald, fold Bea seamlessly into their world. She becomes part of their lives. She becomes part of this lively family, learning their ways and their stories, adjusting to their affluent lifestyle. Bea grows close to both boys, one older and one younger, and fills in the gaps between them. Before long, before she even realizes it, life with the Gregorys feels more natural to her than the quiet, spare life with her own parents back in England. As Bea comes into herself and relaxes into her new life, summers on the coast in Maine, new friends clamoring to hear about life across the sea, the girl she had been begins to fade away until abruptly she is called back to London when the war ends. Desperate as she is not to leave this life behind, Bea dutifully retraces her trip across the Atlantic back to her new old world. As she returns to post-war London, the memory of her American family stays with her, never fully letting go, and always pulling on her heart as she tries to move on and pursue love and a little life of her own. Next up, The Vaster Wilds by Lauren Groff. And fortunately, I do own this book, but I never got around to reading it this year. A servant girl escapes from a colonial settlement in the wilderness. She carries nothing with her but her wits, a few possessions, and the spark of God that burns hot within her. What she finds is this terra incognito is beyond the limits of her imagination and will bend her belief in everything that her own civilization has taught her. And that's all it says. You know, I have noticed something with Lauren Groff's books, that the plot synopses half the time give you nothing. But still, those couple sentences alone, like, that sounds really intriguing, though, at least. Next up, Looking for Jane by Heather Marshall. So it looks like we have 3 different timelines here. There's like a 2017, 1971, and a 1980. So in 2017, when Angela Crichton discovers a mysterious letter containing a life-shattering confession, she is determined to find the intended recipient. Her search takes her back to the 1970s, when a group of daring women operated an illegal underground abortion network in Toronto, known only by its whispered code name, Jane. So in 1971, as a teenager, Dr. Evelyn Taylor was sent to a home for fallen women, where she was forced to give up her baby for adoption, a trauma she has never recovered from. Despite harrowing police raids and the constant threat of arrest, she joins the Jane Network as an abortion provider, determined to give other women the choice she never had. And then in 1980, after discovering a shocking secret about her family, 20-year-old Nancy Mitchell begins to question everything she has ever known. When she unexpectedly becomes pregnant, she feels like she has no one to turn to for help. Grappling with her decision, she locates Jane and finds a place of her own alongside Dr. Taylor within the network's ranks, but she can never escape the lies that haunt her. Next up, The Paris Daughter by Kristen Harbell. Paris in 1939, young mothers Elise and Juliette become fast friends the day they meet in the beautiful Bois de Boulogne. Though there is a shadow of war creeping across Europe, neither woman suspects that their lives are about to irreparably change. I can read. When Elise becomes the target of the German occupation, she entrusts Juliette with the most precious thing in her life, her young daughter, playmate to Juliette's own little girl. But nowhere is safe in war, not even a quiet little bookshop like Juliette's library. And when a bomb falls on their neighborhood, Juliette's world is destroyed along with it. More than a year later, with the war finally ending, Elise returns to reunite with her daughter, only to find her friend's bookshop reduced to rubble, and Juliette nowhere to be found. What happened to her daughter in those last terrible moments? Juliette has seemingly vanished without a trace, taking all the answers with her. Elise's desperate search leads her to New York and to Juliette, one final fateful time. Ooh, dramatic. Next up, The Covenant of Water by Abraham Verghese, I think is how that might be pronounced. It says that it spans the years of 1900 to 1977, so multi-decades. It's set in Kerala on South India's Malabar coast, and follows 3 generations of family that suffers a peculiar affliction. In every generation, at least one person dies by drowning, dear God. And in Kerala, water is everywhere. The family is part of a Christian community that traces itself to the time of the apostles, but times are shifting, and the matriarch of this family, known as Big Amakai, literally Big Mother, will witness unthinkable changes at home and at large over the span of her extraordinary life. And then that's kind of it for the plot. It doesn't really give anything else away, but that still sounds good. Next up, Go as a River by Shelley Reed. On a cool autumn day in 1948, Victoria Nash delivers late-season peaches from her family's farm, set amid the wild beauty of Colorado. As she heads into her village, a disheveled stranger stops to ask her the way. How she chooses to answer will unknowingly alter the course of both their young lives. So begins the mesmerizing story of split-second choices and courageous acts that propel Victoria away from the only home she has ever known, and towards a reckoning with loss, hope, and her own untapped strength. Ooh, okay, that's a really cryptic plot synopsis. Next up, The Echo of Old Books by Barbara Davis. Rare book dealer Ashlyn Greer's affinity for books extends beyond the intoxicating scent of old paper, ink, and leather. She can feel the echoes of the book's previous owners, an emotional fingerprint only she can read. When Ashlyn discovers a pair of beautifully bound volumes that appear to have never been published, her gift quickly becomes an obsession. Not only is each inscribed with a startling incrimination, but the authors, Hemi and Bell, tell conflicting sides of a tragic romance. With no trace of how these mysterious books came into the world, Ashlyn is caught up in a decades-old literary mystery, beckoned by 2 hearts in ruins, whoever they were, wherever they are. Determined to learn the truth behind the doomed lover's tale, she reads on, following a trail of broken promises and seemingly unforgivable betrayals. The more Ashlyn learns about Hemi and Belle, the nearer she comes to bringing closure to their love story and the unfinished chapters of her own life. Next up, North Woods by Daniel Mason. When a pair of young lovers abscond from a Puritan colony, little do they know that their humble cabin in the woods will become home to an extraordinary succession of inhabitants. An English soldier destined for glory abandons the battlefields of the New World to devote himself to apples. A pair of spinster twins survive war and famine, only to succumb to envy and desire. A crime reporter unearths a mass grave, but finds the ancient trees refuse to give up their secrets. A lovelorn painter, a conman, a stalking panther, each one confronts the mysteries of the North Woods. They come to realize that the dark, raucous, beautiful past is very much alive. Ooh. Next up, The House of Eve by Sadaka Johnson. Sorry, I'm totally butchering that name. 1950s Philadelphia. 15-year-old Ruby Pearsall is on track to becoming the first in her family to attend college. In spite of having a mother more interested in keeping a man than raising a daughter, but a taboo love affair threatens to pull her back down into the poverty and desperation that has been passed on to her like a birthright. Eleanor Quarles arrives in Washington, D.C. with ambition and secrets. When she meets the handsome William Pride at Howard University, they fall madly in love. But William hails from one of D.C.'s elite wealthy black families, and his parents don't let just anyone into their fold. Eleanor hopes that a baby will make her finally feel at home in William's family and grant her the life she's been searching for, but having a baby and fitting in is easier said than done. Next up, Lady Tan's Circle of Women by Lisa C. And this is a book that I do own, but yet I have not got to yet, you guys. I can't wait to get to this one. According to Confucius, an educated woman is a worthless woman, but Tan, born into an elite family, yet haunted by death, separations, and loneliness, is being raised by her grandparents to be of use. Her grandmother is one of only a handful of female doctors in China, and she teaches Yun Yunxian. That's the Tan character, Tan Yunxian. I'm sorry if I'm butchering the name, you guys. She teaches her the pillars of Chinese medicine, the four examinations: looking, listening, touching, and asking, something a man can never do with a female patient. From a young age, Yunxian learns about women's illnesses, many of which relate to childbearing, alongside a young midwife in training, Mai Ling. The two girls find fast friendship and a mutual purpose, despite the prohibition that a doctor should never touch blood while a midwife comes in frequent contact with it, and they vow to be forever friends, sharing in each other's joys and struggles. No mud, no lotus, they tell themselves, from adversity, beauty can bloom. But when Yunxian is sent into an arranged marriage, her mother-in-law forbids her from seeing Mai Ling, and from helping the women and girls in the household. Yunxian is to act like a proper wife, embroider bound foot slippers, pluck instruments, recite poetry, give birth to sons, and stay forever within the walls of the family compound, the garden of fragrant delights. How might a woman like Yunxian break free of these traditions, go on to treat women and girls from every level of society, and lead a life of such importance that many of her remedies are still used 5 centuries later? Ooh. Next up, River, Sing Me Home by Eleanor Shear. The master of the Providence plantation in Barbados gathers his slaves and announces the king has decreed an end to slavery. As of the following day, the Emancipation Act of 1834 will come into effect. The cries of joy fall silent when he announces that they are no longer his slaves. They are now his apprentices. No one can leave. They must work for him for another 6 years. Freedom is just another name for the life they have always lived. So Rachel runs. Away from Providence, she begins a desperate search to find her children, the 5 who survived birth and were sold. Are any of them still alive? Rachel has to know. The grueling, dangerous journey takes her from Barbados, then by river, deep into the forest of British Guyana, and finally across the sea to Trinidad. She is driven on by the certainty that a mother cannot be truly free without knowing what has become of her children, even if the answer is more than she can bear. Next up, Let Us Descend by Jesmyn Ward. Annis, sold south by the white enslaver who fathered her, is the reader's guide through this hellscape. As she struggles through the miles-long march, Annis turns inward, seeking comfort from memories of her mother and stories of her African warrior grandmother. Throughout, she opens herself to a world beyond this world, one with teeming with earth and water of myth and history, spirits who nurture and give, and those who manipulate and take. And yeah, it says up here that it's a reimagining of American slavery. Yeah, I mean, there's like no plot here. It's just kind of praising the author for the writing and whatnot. I need to know what the plot is about. This is like not telling me anything about the plot, unfortunately. Next up, Banyan. I think I'm pronouncing that wrong. Bayan Moon by Teo Tai. When Anne Tran gets the call that her fiercely beloved grandmother, Min, has passed away, her life is already at a crossroads. In the years since she's last seen Min, Anne has built a seemingly perfect life, a beautiful lake house, a charming professor boyfriend, and invites to elegant parties that bubble over with champagne and good taste. But it all crumbles with one positive pregnancy test. With both her relationship and carefully planned future now in question, Anne returns home to Florida to face her estranged mother, Hong, I think is how it's pronounced. Back in Florida, Huang is simultaneously mourning her mother and resenting her for having the relationship with Anne that she never did. Then Anne and Wang learn that Min has left them both the Bayan house, the crumbling old manor that was Anne's childhood home, in all its strange Gothic glory. Under the same roof for the first time in years, mother and daughter must face the simmering questions of their past and their uncertain futures, while trying to rebuild their relationship without the one person who's always held them together. Next up, Wayward by Amelia Hart. This has three different timelines: 2019, 1619, and 1942. Dear God, let's get going. Okay, so in 2019, under cover of darkness, Kate flees London for ramshackle Wayward Cottage, inherited from a great aunt she barely remembers. With its tumbling ivy and overgrown garden, the cottage is worlds away from the abusive partner who tormented Kate, but she begins to suspect that her great aunt had a secret, one that lurks in the bones of the cottage, hidden ever since the witch hunts of the 17th century. So in 1619, Altha is awaiting trial for the murder of a local farmer who was stampeded to death by his herd. As a girl, Altha's mother taught her their magic, a kind not rooted in spellcasting but in a deep knowledge of the natural world. But unusual women have always been deemed dangerous, and as the evidence for witchcraft is set out against Altha, she knows it will take all her powers to maintain her freedom. So then in 1942, as World War II rages, Violet is trapped in her family's grand crumbling estate. Straitjacketed by social convention, she longs for the robust education her brother receives, and for her mother, long deceased, who was rumored to have gone mad before her death. The only traces Violet has of her are a locket bearing the initial W and the word wayward scratched into the baseboard of her bedroom. And it says, weaving together the stories of three extraordinary women across 5 centuries, this book is an enthralling novel of female resilience and the transformative power of the natural world. And the last book that was part of the Goodreads Historical Fiction nominees, The Heaven and Earth Grocery Store by James McBride. In 1972, when workers in Pottstown, Pennsylvania were digging the foundations for a new development, the last thing they expected to find was a skeleton at the bottom of a well. Who the skeleton was and how it got there were two of the long-held secrets kept by the residents of Chicken Hill, the dilapidated neighborhood where immigrant Jews and African Americans lived side by side and shared ambitions and sorrows. As these characters' stories overlap and deepen, it becomes clear how much the people who live on the margins struggle and what they must do to survive. When the truth is finally revealed about what happened on Chicken Hill and the part the town's white establishment played in it, and McBride, the author, he shows us that even in dark times, it is love and community, heaven and earth, that sustain us. So you guys, that is it for the 20 books that were nominated in the historical fiction category on Goodreads this year. In the comments below, do you guys agree with these choices? You know, in recent years, I've really enjoyed the lists, and I just wasn't really a big fan of the nominees this year. I mean, there are several of them that sounded really good, um, but yeah, a lot of them I just was like, I genuinely have no interest in that. um, but yeah, maybe that's just me. You guys in the comments below, have you read any of the books that were nominated this year, or what were books that you would have preferred being on the list? Just let me know your thoughts down below. So that's it for this video. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you like this video, you may like these other videos. Bye, guys.